Well, welcome to Choices Fruit. We have Jim Kimmel. And Jim Kimmel, give a little background on Jim. He's an omnivorous seeker, experiential, intellectual, spiritual, and whatever else may come along. He's educated as an ecologist, both biological and cultural, at Baylor, the Yale School of the Environment, and UT Austin, with additional study at the Yale Divinity School, the Seminary of the Southwest, and a certificate in eco-spirituality from the Graduate Theological Union. He is Professor Emeritus of Environmental Geography at Texas State University and currently chair of the School of Wisdom Committee at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in San Marcos, Texas. Much of his interests focus on creation care at St. Mark's in the Diocese of West Texas. Interspiritual Earth Care is a program he developed and debuted at the Diocese of West Texas Council meeting in February. So welcome, Jim. And I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce any of those words correctly. And so today we are going to be talking about using and developing technologies for the betterment of the environment and humanity. So the first question I have for you, Jim, is technological advancement is integral to the emergence of a global civilization. So rather than fear technology or prohibit access, how can humanity learn to work with it as a tool in a manner that constructively advances our material and spiritual progress?
Well, if we could answer that question, we would all be quite rich and famous. But that doesn't stop us from needing to address it. I'm educated actually as a cultural ecologist, and so I've tried to look at humans as natural residents of Earth. But one of the things that is characteristic of us is we're technological. That's just what we do. We're tool makers, and we made we chipped tools out of flint, which is a concentration of silicon. Now we use silicon to make electronic parts. So we're still using sand, and but I can't think of an example in history where we have refused to use a technology. So we're going to use it. I think the big question comes to be that how can we use it constructively, and how can we use these things equitably? We talk about how many devices we all have, and I'm astounded at how many digital devices. In fact, I'm sitting in front of 4 of them right here. And but not everybody has that. We have an epidemic in our country of kids being on their digital devices excessively, but other kids don't have access to them anywhere. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, and there's not equity. So I think the thing that folks interested in what we are have to think about is how do we make the public at large, not the affluent, not the technologically oriented, because they're going to do these things, but how do we let the rest of the people know about the positive uses that can be made with this technology?
Right. Okay. So focusing on equity, I like that. To using technology to work as a tool, but focusing on equity. I like your response. So following that, in your experience, obviously these questions are very, very high level, and they're going to take all of our input, right? But in your using your experience and any stories you have, how can humanity learn to effectively navigate and neutralize the potentially harmful impacts of technology and make positive spiritual choices in order to effectively contribute to unity and building of a new world?
I think we do it by providing good examples and good opportunities. Um, my approach to helping people learn is to give them something they're excited about, something that compels them, rather than trying to force something upon them. Generally, our experience with standard teaching has not been real effective. You can talk and you can make people do things, and you think in a classroom you have a captive audience, but you really don't, because there's no telling where their minds are. But if we can do things that attract them and compel them, then I think that is a big part of it. And of course, there are many other things available on the internet that are incredibly compelling and attractive, often in negative ways. So we're in competition with those. I'm fascinated by the um, challenge to develop websites and so forth that are compelling. I think of a website as a book. Um, I I wrote a couple of books and spent 5 years on each of them, and and I think a website is worthy of that much effort. Um, and a website has some advantages that a book doesn't have, in that you have to bear the cost of a device to look at it, but you don't have the publishing cost, the transportation cost, and all those sort of things that you have with a book. Plus, you're able to keep them updated. They're dynamic, and so the thing that I'm working on, particularly in the Episcopal Church, I'm in addition to being chair of the School of Wisdom Committee, I'm also co-chair of our Earth Care team, and I've recently proposed that we start a water school. We live in San Marcos. San Marcos is defined by the San Marcos River, and everybody is attracted to the river. They love it. Um, but and there are some school programs, but not for the general public. And I use the word school very advisedly. Generally, school does not generate a very good impression in people's minds, but maybe we can think of a school of fish. Maybe that's more attractive. But I hope in that effort, what we're calling the water school, that we can have people out doing inquiry-based, self-directed learning. And part of what I'm doing in regard of this project is developing one of my websites called Learning from Water. I'm setting it up so that it will be something that people can use as a guide for their own learning processes. You don't have to have a teacher every place, because we've got information available, but you sort of have to have a guide, and people always have that little phone with them that can do that if it's used properly.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. So you're creating a tool that people can use that's essentially connected to your website, which will then be universally accessible. And you're creating a tool through investigative learning, it sounds like, which that sounds fascinating, and definitely like accessible to many. Yeah, and how do you feel that will contribute to, I guess, unity, and creating a more unified community? That tool that you're working on. Maybe you haven't been asked this question before.
I haven't thought about that very much, and unity is well, okay, I do have an answer to that.
Okay.
Um, as a in my education, I have a graduate degree in sociology also. To be a cultural ecologist, you've got to know something about humans. And I think that community is our basic building block for humanity. It would be sort of normal to think that the family is the basic building block, but family cannot exist without community. Community really is the central part of existence, the central part of culture. Community, break the word apart, is common unity. And so I think by consciously building community associated with these things and showing how these things benefit community, I think we have an opportunity to bring about some unity. Um,
Yeah,
so,
it's a common shared resource. Water, the San Marcos
mhm,
River is a common
mhm,
shared resource that not that and teaching people more about how to safely and like to safely use it, and with being empowered with tools and information
mhm.
that makes sense, that would bring people together.
Part
Um,
of what I plan in this water school project, to the extent that it is self-directed,
mm,
the I think it's necessary for people to get together once in a while. And so what I've proposed for the water school is a lot of different activities, all the way from making movies and writing poetry to building boats. But once a year, I plan to have a festival at St. Mark's where people show what they've done and talk to each other and get together and trade stories and things. And it doesn't have to be only once a year. Um, I, um, I was a passionate teacher for many, many years. And after I retired from the university, I was asked to develop an online course of one of the courses that I had developed. And I was very interested in doing that. And I worked very, very hard developing the materials for the course. And I taught it twice, offered it twice, and both times it was ranked as the number one course in the department, which is unusual for online courses. But I stopped teaching it after two times because I didn't have any contact with students. It was
mm,
all, you know, all the materials worked well and people thought they learned from them and so forth, but I didn't have community.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I learned from that what they call a hybrid course, where you have online, but then you have face to face.
Mhm.
And so I would plan to build that into anything I do. So, we can have an online community and they can be effective, but I think it's a whole lot better if those people get to see and touch each other somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. What was the topic of the course? I'm curious.
It was a course in environmental interpretation.
Okay.
And that word, it's one of those unfortunate words that has so many meanings. It is not language interpretation. It's what you experience when you go to a national park. The ranger talks, the signs, the brochures, the booklets, the movies, all those are called interpretation. So this course, I based it on National Park Service standards and methods, and it basically prepared students to work in national and state parks.
Yeah, fascinating. Wow. What a useful course too. Okay, well, I'm gonna move on to this next question, and before I read the question, I'm gonna preface it with a quote from the Baha'i world community, or the Baha'i community, specifically from a document called Insights in the Fields, Technology, Values, and Society. So when technology is guided by moral discernment and spiritual values, it can contribute significantly to societal well-being and the advancement of civilization. Um, so how do we in our lives and our work in our practice? How do we ensure that our values, our aspirations, and our needs are integrated into the design, development, and use of technology? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think by example. The the sages that have that we look at as our religions, most of them taught by example, or short little statements. As a university professor, I was, I would lecture for an hour and 20 minutes or something, which really kind of kills everybody. So I think shorter ways of more direct, more succinct ways of communicating are important. To build these things into technology is a big issue because we don't build the technology in most cases. We can build the way it's used, and that's why I think the internet is so important for us to learn to use it in websites and blogs. Exactly the kind of thing we're doing here. And one thing that I think in such a difficult question as this is to use our imagination. Nothing, humans don't do anything without first imagining it. Just think about it. We don't even go to get a drink of water without first having an image in our mind coming from our body that says we're thirsty, but then we have an image in our mind about where we're going to do and where we're going to go and what we're going to do to get a drink of water. So if imagination is important for something that basic, think how important it is for these earth changing kinds of things that we're talking about here. So I think for people like us to sit around and just let our imaginations run. What can we possibly do? I'm in my 80s now, so I can well remember in the 50s, Buck Rogers and the space travel fantasies and all those kind of things. And there was a cartoon character named Dick Tracy that had a wristwatch radio, and he could talk on his radio to people. Those things now. Jules Verne's in the 19th century, wrote about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with his Nautilus submarine. We have those now, and so those kind of fantasies, those are imagination. So I think it's worth our while to just play with that. There's a man named Rob Hopkins in England who has really demonstrated the importance of imagination to bring about astounding changes, actually from the grassroots. So just play with imagination.
That makes me think of, I'm thinking about more spaces for reflection, right? Imagination, more spaces for reflecting and using our imagination to envision. And it's making me think about the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program within the supported by the Baha'i community, but it's something that is available to all people in communities. But it really does encourage those spaces for kind of like reflection, but in a group setting, with youth thinking about their community and solutions for problems in their community. I don't know, something about what you were saying made me think of that a bit. But I agree, imagination's important. I have two
and
kids,
you
so
mentioned
I try to
you mentioned within the organization encouraging these things, and that's part of what we need to do, because we have a cultural discouragement against imagination. We sometimes tell a child, "Oh, you're just using your imagination. You've got too much imagination. Get to work." do what I've told you to do here. Um, and so I think by recognizing the importance of imagination and really fostering that, because I mean, little kids especially are, oh, gee, they have incredible abilities to imagine. Uh, and we should have those as adults, you know?
Right. Yeah, I like that. And that links back to your previous response to one of my questions where you were talking about encouraging people in their kind of innate capacities in these settings, and really like recognizing those capacities. So, well, great. Okay, I'm moving on to the next question. And it is again prefaced with a quote. Spirituality, which has traditionally been the area of human experience, most centrally concerned with human values and the definition of man's purpose, is seldom considered in the search for solutions to current world problems, such as those of the human environment. You being a man involved in the church, why is spirituality important in addressing current world problems such as those related to the human environment?
I think we are spirit. We are. I like to play with what little I know about quantum physics, and the idea that we exist in this field of energy, and that we are concentrations of energy within that field of energy. And I transfer that to spirit. Um, that I think we are concentrations of spirit. And again, we don't, we're not very comfortable with that. That kind of probably frightens us to think about because we don't understand what spirituality is. It is that word, and the whole idea of spirituality is used and misused in many ways. And if you're dealing with your child, and well, the role of a parent, the role of school, and so forth, is to I'm sorry, you can.
I'm sorry, I threw you off there. This
That's
cat
fine.
is a attention hogger.
Um, well, the cat has attention. The cat's paying attention, and I think cats have spirits probably also. But the I think if we would recognize that we are spirit, and that spirituality, I'm going to quote a man that I'm very impressed with and using his ideas a lot now. His name is Stephen Charleston. He was Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Alaska, and he's also an elder in the Choctaw Nation. His ancestors were Christian ministers in the Choctaw Nation, and so he's written a number of books that pull together Christianity and his Native American beliefs in a very constructive way. But he said spirituality is not an escape from reality. Think about that, because usually when we think a person being spiritual, it means they're off, being woo-woo somehow. He says it's not an escape from reality, but a vision for how to change it. Therefore, faith is a tool for transformation. So I think that puts spirituality really in an extremely important position in terms of accomplishing the kinds of things that we're hoping for here. And he's talking about faith as being a tool for transformation. Another thing that I think about a lot is power, the nature of power, what power is, where it gets used. And one of the things we usually think of power as forcing something that maybe we don't want to happen. Here's military power. Here's a person overpowering another person. One of my favorite theologians is Catherine Keller, who's a process theologian. And she says that power is the ability to influence, the ability to influence. And that means that obviously power can be used as for evil. You can influence, you can do things that bring about evil, but you can also use it for influencing things for good. So I think, in part of this, I could probably make the argument that spirituality may be the most powerful thing we have. Spirituality partially involves belief. That quotation I just said is that faith is a tool for transformation. Faith is belief. And I always used to tell my students that what people believe is more important than what they know. Because belief is belief. I believe it. I know it, maybe I don't. Some people have an awful lot of confidence in what they believe or what they know. So these things are not precise terms, but I think spirituality is the essence of what we are and what we do.
That kind of, I think it connects a little bit with this next question, talking about the human heart. And yeah, this quote says, "We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside of us, and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions." So why would you say, Jim, is it important to understand the interconnectedness, or do you believe it's important to understand the interconnectedness between the human heart and the external environment, and how these things are connected?
Yeah, I love this quotation that because it so clearly states really what I was getting at earlier. We are not separate from our environment. The idea that I mentioned earlier of us, of everything being a coalescence of energy within this field of energy. That means we're all connected. And this is Einstein. I didn't make this up. It's my understanding of what he talked about. And though he said some of it is spooky things at a distance when when they talked about quantum entanglement. But wow, what wild stuff we're dealing with. And I think the heart, Saint-Bergeau is a theologian, a mystic, an Episcopal priest who says that the heart is our antenna to the spirit, and that it is where we are connected, let's say. So, but I think the powerful thing about this quotation is that it recognizes that we are in a dance with the environment. A social theory that I like a lot was called symbolic interactionism, and it says, it is what it says, that we receive symbolic messages from someone. If I sit here and look like this, Rose, you're going to do something else, and so you're going to react to that somehow. So we've got a dance going on here. I see a smile on your face, which makes me say, well, I'm probably not in trouble yet. So we are that way. That is the way we live, not only between each other, but between our so-called physical environment, which is part of us. And so I think this is an extremely powerful idea that is one of those things that well, those of us that are interested in this, that think this way, need to promote this idea more, because we live still very much in a dualistic world. Uh, Good old Rene Descartes kind of set us off on that path, and we're not, even though modern physics is letting us know that things don't work that way. Still, an awful lot of people think of divisions and think of each individual thing as being separate from other things, and certainly do not recognize that our biophysical environment and our social cultural environment, we are part of it. We shape it. It shapes us.
Definitely. Very interested in that as well. Okay, my questions are under my cat. Okay, this next question, or this next quote that I'm going to share, says, "This world is our temporary home. We are spiritual beings living in a material world which exists to train us for the next existence. Respect for nature increases with education, with the study of the sciences and the arts. Evidently, our environment affects our emotional and spiritual lives, just as it shapes our physical lives." Those are thoughts from Choices Fruit. So how does the mutual relationship between an individual's inner life and the environment impact lasting changes in human life and the world ecosystem? If you have any thoughts about that, any anecdotes to illustrate it?
Well, this follows on the rest of what we're saying. I think everything we are and do is a product of this, and our limitation, our problem, is in failing to recognize that and to use it. The in kind of the history of spiritual traditions, they've there's been talk of the Akashic record, the cloud of witness, the Great Spirit, the new sphere that Chardin talked about, and now the 0 point field in quantum physics. Those things all imply that there is a field of knowledge, a field of experience that we live in and that we are products of. And so consequently, those things are all within us. From the Christian standpoint, one of the statements is that the kingdom of heaven is within you. And most churches haven't caught on to that yet.
Yeah.
But I think that is that exact statement, that the theology that I practice is called panentheism, which implies the idea that God is spirit and God is within us and we are within the God thing. So again, we're not separate. All of this is one entity that can be very, very scary if you think about it in some ways, and can be incredibly liberating if you think about it some other ways.
That reminds me of a quote, one of my favorite quotes. I have very few quotes memorized, but this one says, "Man is a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to," oh gosh. Man is a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom.
Wow.
So kind of, yeah, isn't that great? I
That
think
is
about that a lot with children. It's from Baha'u'llah.
yeah.
I think about that a lot with children, but it also applies to adults. But I thought about that last part too, and enable mankind to benefit therefrom.
Mhm.
It's all connected.
And I think what that implies is an uncovering
Mhm.
a discovery of that within us. And that's one of the reasons that I put so much emphasis on experiential education, on inquiry-based learning, because those are letting the learner um, build on what is in them, build on what's interesting to them. I have 4 university degrees, and I don't learn very much in those degrees. You know, I I learned by what I did. I learned by the projects that I did. I remember very little. The hundreds of courses that I took. I think Rose, you're probably a very good student. I was usually thinking about something else, and I did well enough to get the degrees and all that kind of thing. But boy, I wanted to get out and do something and learn something on my own, which is the uncovering of those gems, I think. Um, and so I hope, well, I know, in fact, in much of formal education, that they are moving more towards this kind of discovery-based, inquiry-based learning, because the way that works is that if we could say from the traditional standpoint, well, we have to have a curriculum. You've got to know these things, and in many cases that's correct. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but in many other cases, we're forcing people to learn a curriculum that really isn't very relevant to them, and they're not going to remember much of it. In inquiry-based learning, they start with something they're interested in, and then they find all the things that is connected to, and all of those things have meaning to them. So I think the ultimate result is that people leave that process with probably more understanding, more
Mm.
knowledge, so to speak, than ones that are, kind of driven through a lockstep curriculum. Um,
Mhm.
I have
Mhm.
a dear friend that he's a genius, but he had a terrible time with school. He just wouldn't do his homework because he had other things, better things to do. Um, I think he finally did graduate from high school, but he's an incredible pilot, incredible mariner, an incredible rancher, and does very, very complex, difficult things, and just knows. You know, I spent a lot of time with him, and this guy is just like an encyclopedia of things. He's self-educated, really. Um, so I think if we would think of education as, it ought to be play, it ought to be fun, it ought to be something that you want to do, and our school systems and our whole educational process is set up pretty much so that everybody involved in it is happy when you have a holiday. you know, we don't have to go to school today. Hey, wonderful.
Yeah, we're not encouraging the love of learning in
Yeah,
our school
yeah.
system so much. I think that kind of connects to this next question and your story of this friend of yours. This quote says, "A human being is not only an economic and social creature, but also a spiritual one with free will and a conscience that enables the search for meaning and truth. Without the freedom to pursue this fundamentally human quest, neither dignity nor justice nor development in its full sense is possible." So I think you touched on this a little bit with your talking about inquiry-based education. But the question is, how should the systems of education, science, and technology be arranged to reflect the material and spiritual dimensions of the human being? And how can we create, big question, sorry. You can touch on as much of it as you want in the next few minutes.
Oh,
How
I
can
have the
we
solution to all these things. Just
yeah. How can we create systematic learning and participation within each community in a way that enables the community to identify its strengths and needs to experiment with new ideas and methods, new technologies and processes. So you can take a stab at any part of that question.
Takes a lot of freedom. Takes a lot of freedom. I I'm gonna I've seen these questions before, and I'm gonna just kind of tell you what my response to those. I said there are two questions here, and I think my response to the earlier questions probably applies to the first one. So I'm going to really look at only the second question. Our educational system and much of our culture is based on economics, on an economic model of scarcity, basically, that there's only so much of this that you can have, and you've got to work really hard to get it. And in that model, we in the educational model, we deal with that scarcity by making grades scarce. We've got the bell-shaped curve that supposedly students' performance in class falls in that bell-shaped curve. Well, that's statistically irrational, because the bell-shaped curve is based on large random numbers, not on 15 people in a class. But pedagogically, it is disastrous, I think, because it says, okay, if you make the best grade, then you are the best student. You get the awards. You get the statue or the gold plaque, or your mommy and daddy are happy with you because you're going to. Well, and people quickly find out that there are a lot of ways to get that best grade without learning much. But that's the whole concept of our society. We talk about who are the best people. Well, they're the ones with the most money, the way that's defined, and that's not true. And I think the antidote to this is to realize that economics, which we're talking about being the driver here, it's based on the Greek word oikos, which means home. But ecology is also based on that same root word. Both ecology and economics are based on this word that means home. And so these things should not be in competition with each other. We can stop. Thomas Berry, a Catholic priest who wrote a lot about human relationship with the environment, said that our educational system ought to be ecologically based rather than economically based. That an ecosystem there's much more cooperation and synergy that goes on in an ecosystem than there is competition. And so if we would just kind of revise that, and just to kind of finish off here in terms of I think we have some examples, practical examples of this. About 30 years ago, an economist coined the term they call the triple bottom line in business. And that means that instead of the one simple bottom line of, how much was our profit this month, that businesses operate with a triple bottom line, which is planet, people, and prosperity, all three of those, because businesses really do have intimate relationships with all of those things. And so quite a number of businesses are operating that way now, very, very successfully. So we've got an example, even in the the tough world of business, of people realizing that, hey, it's more complicated than we think it is. We need to look at some other things other than this simplistic way of the way we have thought.
I love that planet. I've never heard of that business model, planet, people, prosperity. That's great.
Yeah, the three P's is what they refer to it, the triple bottom line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. And that really concludes the formal questions that I had prepared. if you have any closing thoughts, Jim, about this topic of using and developing technologies for the betterment of the environment and humanity, then now's the time to share, and then we'll close up our interview.
We're in a very difficult time for humans. Probably the most rapid and profound change that we've ever been in with climate change, with the changes that are going on across the world in terms of governance, with a huge population that we cannot deal with equitably. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana 60 years ago, and I would have never ever thought 60 years ago that at this stage of my life we would be in this kind of situation. But I don't despair. Um, these difficult times are opportunities for rethinking and redoing. Things are kind of coming unglued, which is kind of good that some things come unglued because there's a chance to reglue them in some other ways. And the theologian that I mentioned earlier, Catherine Keller, says that creativity operates on the edge of chaos. And kind of think about that. When you're really creating something, you're kind of having to take some things apart and put them back together in some other ways. So I am approaching this time with, I don't want to say joy, but I'm approaching it with enthusiasm. Just because I think there are opportunities here. I'm certainly very saddened by a lot of the things that are happening, but I'm not falling into despair about those. There's nothing I can do about most of those, but there are some things that perhaps I can do to move us in a positive way. In my religious tradition, there's a statement that faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And I think of that. I kind of like boats and nautical analogies. I think of faith, hope, and love. I think of faith as my confidence in my boat that it can weather the storms that it needs to weather. I think of hope as the wind in the sails that can move it. And I think of love as the compass course that I can follow. And that kind of gives me a model to operate on, if you will.
I love that. Thank you. That's a great way to end with that analogy and your insights. Thank you so much for sharing your just experience and wisdom and insights. How many years of teaching did you say you did? It was a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. And all your travels around the world. Thank you so much for sharing with the audience and Joyce's Fruit. All the great responses to the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close the recording.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been delightful to visit with you.